Need a break? Write a shell script that runs make and then make clean over and over again while you space out listening to this Fungineering podcast. It'll look like you're working, and you'll get about an hour and a half closer to the weekend. And death.
Toyota's Research Institute head says full autonomous driving is not even close.
I wonder what that's supposed to mean, because I'd like them to assign a year, because I would assume whoever the head of Toyota's Research Institute for Autonomy is would have a pretty good grasp of when it's going to be here.
It's Gil Pratt. That's who it is.
Okay.
And he or she says it's a long way off because reasons.
Yeah, that's a pretty disappointing answer to come from somebody who is arguably in a good position to give a pretty authoritative answer. Because that person should at least be able to say something like, no sooner than 5 years. Even if they can't say, it's 8 years away, or something like that.
Yeah, they really don't have any additional detail at all.
Yeah, so what really irritates me about that is that you read things online from people who range in knowledge from, normal idiot on the internet to very knowledgeable. And they'll say things, pretty much nobody thinks that it's going to be here sooner than about 3 or 4 years from now. But then people will have estimates all the way up to 50 years to get it done.
I feel like that's kind of insulting to the human race.
Yeah, and so I've really tried to think, what is a technology that is within the bounds of the laws of science that we conceived of and then took us 50 years to master?
Fusion.
Yeah, and so that was the one I could come up with.
Okay.
So fusion reactor, I assume, is the fusion you're talking of. We're still working on that.
Yeah, I realize that's a good point, because I think people went from fusion is what the sun does to maybe fusion is possible to fusion bombs in just a few years. There were only a few people in the world who were really in a position to do anything actually fusion related. And then they were like, hey, what if we do a fusion bomb? And the US government's like, yeah, what if you do? Here's a bunch of money. And then they're like, yeah, so we did it. And that actually happened really fast.
Right. That was probably 30 years or so.
No, it wasn't even that long.
To go from the scientific theory until the actual execution of a bomb.
Oh, well, I feel like if you're going to go that way, then the earliest scientific theory for self-driving cars, you could probably point back to a Jules Verne book, or there's some ancient Chinese fable where there's a golem and you insert a scroll into his back and then he drives a rickshaw for you or something like that. And the guy's a self-driving car, right? So there you go.
Okay, so let's define that differently then.
Yeah. First full-scale thermonuclear test, 1952. So I think probably when they were working on the fission weapons, maybe some people were talking about, well, what if we do fusion? But there had to be less than 20 years or so of conceptualizing this might be possible to actually exploding a device. But self-sustaining fusion reactor, that's one of those 50-year, and it still might be 50 years off.
Right, and that's kind of the running joke, is that every 20 years they say it'll be another 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the only example I could come up with too, which is funny that you came up with the same one instantly, of a technology where it's within the bounds of science, and we think it up, and we desire to have it, and then we spend a lot of money and effort on it for a long time, and we still can't do it.
Actually, how about Orion Drive spaceships?
Well, we've never spent a lot of money and effort on that.
Yeah.
Have we ever built a single one? Is that the one where you use basically nuclear explosions?
Yeah, you drop nukes out the back of your ship and they explode, and it's hard to say what the explosion is, but the explosive force basically hits a pusher plate.
Right.
And pushes it along. And then people have come up with better versions where it would have a very large sail in the front, and you would throw a bomb out the front and fire it, and then it would push onto the sail, and the sail pulls the ship along. And that would be a lot more efficient because the sail can capture a much larger solid angle of the sky. And there's all these things like making directional weapons and stuff. I guess they're not really weapons then, but directional nuclear bombs, and being able to capture more of the total blast energy. Anyway, one of these days, we're probably going to do a podcast about alternative space propulsion techniques, and so that'll feature in that.
Okay, but we've never tried to build an Orion Drive spaceship.
Yeah, the only thing I know of is someone built a test vehicle using RDX, which is an explosive, and it worked. It flew.
Okay.
That must have been a really cool test, but that's about it.
Okay. So I think we're still at fusion reactors.
How about trains in vacuum tunnels?
Ugh.
That's something people conceptualized quite some time ago. I bet you can find an old Popular Mechanics from 1920 that has some hand-drawn sketches of trains flying through vacuum tunnels.
Yeah, but no one was dumb enough to ever try to make that work. They were like, even in 1920, we knew this was a stupid idea.
The technology just isn't there to be dumb enough to do this.
We'll need a more efficient furnace in the future to shovel $100 bills into before we can attempt this.
Yeah.
Hopefully a company comes along and builds that furnace.
Yeah, I can't really think of any.
So I guess the point of that whole segue was, when people say, oh, autonomous cars won't be here for 50 more years, it's really a ridiculous statement.
Yeah.
There's almost no technology that we can conceive of that takes us that long to build and perfect, and then additionally, if it's appropriate, bring to market and commercialize and sell to everybody.
Yeah.
And autonomous cars are not that big of an engineering problem. You have sensors, you read what the road looks like, and you read what's going on, and then you have to come up with a bunch of clever ways to handle that data and a bunch of ways to decide what to do, and then you have the car execute it. And then every frame, you do that again. And it's not even a hard problem to conceptualize how to solve at that high level.
From an engineering perspective.
Yeah.
From a political perspective, it's very difficult.
Right. And so that's a funny thing, because I talked to engineers about this, and I talked to a couple at work this last week about autonomous cars and what they thought. And a bunch of them, since I work in simulation, a lot of them were like, oh yeah, I'd love an autonomous car. I don't care at all. Like they'd have no hesitation to get in an autonomous car and just let it drive them anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And we work in an industry where we simulate vehicles, and we do all kinds of vehicle simulation. I'll keep it at that. And so we understand at some level how that works, and how vehicle systems work, and how fly-by-wire systems work, and vehicle sensors and avionics and all those things together work. And so we understand that you can bring in a ton of data, and you can process all of that, and you can make these decisions and then execute them. And to a great degree, we see that airplanes today have quite a bit of autonomy in certain regimes of flight.
Yeah. I think one of the problems I see is I feel like there's a lot of journalists who are really committed to some effort that they don't realize is murdering millions of people through traffic deaths by spreading fear that autonomous vehicles will kill people. They're like, what will an autonomous vehicle do if it has the choice between running over one child or two elderly dogs or something like that? What will it choose? And can we even make such a device that could choose the value of a life? And it's like, well, I mean, yeah, but also we could make something where it just tries to brake to a stop, and that's usually not discussed. And they're like, what's the car going to do? Is your car going to kill you? And it's like, well, right now, my car is pretty likely to kill me. I'm likely to kill me using my car. Like, the odds are not very good. I'm not actually that excited about it. Every time I get on the road, I'm like, well, I could die. It's a really small chance, but there's a chance. And the real threshold we're trying to cross here is, when do self-driving cars kill fewer people than human-driven cars? And I think probably we're already there, but everyone enjoys spreading the fear. It gets clicks. You can write stories about it, and fear is this really transmissible emotion. People are like, oh, I'm afraid of this. Let me send it to my friend, and then they can be afraid of it. Nobody's excited to share safety articles. Like, autonomous vehicles pass milestone of being 10 times safer than a human. Yeah, nobody's going to share that story. Autonomous vehicle kills one guy one time in one weird circumstance. Boom. Like, instant viral story. I feel like the media, to some extent, is perpetuating this. Like, how much blood will there be in the streets, basically?
I get tired of the argument about, what will it do? Will it kill you or will it kill the pedestrian? Because the reality is it will respond to the situation. It'll see it faster than you'll see it. It'll understand it faster than you ever could. And it will make the correct decision more often than you would. And it will act in the correct way faster than you ever could.
Yeah. The other thing is it'll like brake faster.
Yeah, it simply won't have the opportunity to get into those kinds of situations nearly as often.
Yeah.
And so I guess once in a very, very long time, you could have these situations where it truly does have to make that decision. But the way that argument is bandied about is as if it's going to be making that decision with the same frequency that people now have fender benders.
Yeah. Or like every time it approaches a crosswalk, it'll be like, I could run over everybody and save my owner a little bit of time. And it'll have to do the internal calculation. And there's this needle, and it's just wavering between the kill, don't kill lines. And then it's like, well, okay, don't kill this time.
But it has an accumulative kill, and eventually it builds up enough points and it gets to kill.
Can't we just program it to only run over journalists that have written these articles? Also, the economist in me wants to say, the correct decision for it to make in the trolley problem is for it to have an instant auction between the two parties on each side. And whoever can bid the most doesn't get run over. Obviously, that's the future. We need some kind of blockchain to keep track of it.
Something that can arbitrate that transaction instantly.
Yeah. Think of the efficiency. But yeah, when are the cars going to be safer than people? Something that can break within human reaction times seems like it would already be a safer driver than I am, and I've never been in an at-fault accident.
Yeah, kind of the threshold of very, very good human reaction time is considered to be a quarter of a second.
Yeah, that's pretty fast.
Yeah, and that's considered to be very good. Like, you are aware, you're ready to try and react. You're waiting for the signal to react to. And you're also maybe well-rested and attentive and young and your mind is clear and everything else.
Is it okay if I'm texting, as long as I'm just typing like one letter at a time and then looking up in between each letter?
Only if your ABV is under 0.08.
Okay.
Because then you're not legally drunk.
Yeah.
But the computer's going to react in 1/240th of a second.
Why so slow?
That's 10 times as fast as the human.
Why so slow?
Because you have to run the process at some speed.
I'm going to run it a lot faster than that. I hope you don't mind.
Okay.
A million times a second.
Okay.
It's going to react in a millionth of a second with rocket brakes.
But you're probably executing multiple frames on the same sensor data, unless all your sensors are transmitting at that rate too.
Here's where we should probably make a note to the listeners. Craig knows a lot more about real-time, whatever it is. Real-time control systems, I guess.
Simulation.
Well, simulation, yeah, but
Yeah.
I guess hard real-time systems. I never have to work with those in my job. I'm only aware of them from academic research. But yeah, the main thing is braking is just such a good reaction to have. Like, when a car brakes, even if it's braking in the wrong circumstance, you could think, oh, well, what if it gets rear-ended? But braking just immediately starts taking energy out of the system. And so whatever incident you end up having, if you had just braked earlier, you probably would have had less of an incident. And so just having an auto braking car, the thing that makes me so sad about it is I feel like the tech was there in maybe the 70s or something to have cars that did some amount of auto braking for you. And I can't imagine how many lives would have been saved, and also just how many cars would have been undamaged and how much time would have been saved too if cars just sort of acted like, hey, I cost thousands of dollars, I'm going to try and protect myself from running into things. Like, even if engineers had just taken that view around it, it would have been really helpful. And I'm really excited for cars that just automatically brake. That'll be such a big deal. But it seems like what you're interested in talking about is cars that they could have opaque windows and get you to the destination.
Yeah, I don't even want a steering wheel anymore.
My arms are tired.
Do you still drive that Honda Accord?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a 2000 Honda Accord.
Okay. So my daily driver is a 2006 Miata. So that puts it in perspective that neither of us is really chomping at the bit buying new cars or anything. I'm I'm hoping that with my 5 minute commute to work each day, that my 2006 car will last until I can buy a fully functional level 5 autonomous vehicle.
Will you even have to fill it with gas?
Hopefully, it's not 50 years away.
What do you fill it with gas like once a year?
I go about a month on a tank of gas.
Oh my gosh.
Because the little 4 cylinder in that car gets about 30 mpg.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it takes me about 2 weeks to have to get gas.
But yeah, I don't want to drive anymore at all. I would like a car that has doors on the side, like in the center on the side, and no cockpit, no dashboard, no steering wheel. And I just want something that's very comfortable and rides nice and takes me places.
Well, to work, right? Just to work.
Hopefully not. It's like a prison car. It only takes you to work.
Yeah, that's the thing. I feel like if we're going to discuss your 5 minute commute to work, then it doesn't really matter that much, does it? It doesn't save you a lot. I have to commute on a highway. And when I first moved here, it was after a year of not driving because of where I had lived previously. And so those first few weeks where I was driving on the highway again, after taking a year off, essentially, I just kept thinking, I'm going to have an accident at some point. I'm probably going to rear end somebody because I just didn't have the attention, like the persistent attention to pay for 20, sometimes like 40 minutes to make sure that I was driving along with traffic, but braking correctly when everyone in front of me braked. Because occasionally someone will be texting, I guess, is the main thing. And then they look up and they go, oh, and then they brake really hard. And then it's very difficult to avoid hitting that person unless you've been looking far ahead of them. And so it just takes a lot of attention. I feel like now I've gotten to a point where I feel pretty comfortable with it. I think I'm a lot less likely to get in an accident, but I always worry about that. And then I also just worry about being in a injurious or fatal accident. It's still one of the more likely causes of death for someone my age, and that would really suck. I don't want to die. And I think an autonomous car could probably do a lot towards preventing anything that would be under my car's control. It won't prevent me from getting hit in the side at like 40 miles per hour in an intersection, and it won't prevent me from getting rear-ended at really high speed, but it could prevent a lot of other classes of accident.
So you can get a car that has auto braking already.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, that's been standard for like 4 or 5 years now on a lot of cars.
Yeah. So after we talked about this before, and after the drive to and from the eclipse we drove, I am a lot more interested in that. And so I was looking at like, hey, what's the Honda Civic have right now? And it looks like most cars have a thing where you have to have your hands on the steering wheel or else they beep at you or do something annoying, which kind of sucks. I don't really see a need to put my hands on the steering wheel. And they'll auto brake and they'll do lane keep assist. And some of them require you to steer a little bit to lane keep and some of them don't. So I'm going to have to go through this complicated review process and searching for YouTube videos and stuff to find a car that auto drives exactly the way I want.
Yeah, so I had a Toyota Camry, I guess, rental car.
Yeah.
A few months ago on a work trip, and it had lane keep assist. And what I found was the gain on the angular speed of turning the wheel back towards the lane you should be in was not very high. And so as you started departing the lane, it would start to turn you back, but you would still be departing the lane for quite a while. And so it expected you to realize what was going on and help it back into the lane too. So it would not keep you in the lane on its own.
Yeah, that seems like it kind of sucks, right?
Yeah.
Like it knows exactly what's going on. It has full control over the steering. And then it's like, I want you to do it.
No, you do it.
Yeah, come on, you're the car. You do it. Yeah, so I'm gonna have to, I guess, search around, or maybe our listeners can leave comments and tell me what vehicle I should buy.
But you want it to be able to navigate lanes hands off.
I just wanted to stay in the lane. That's fine.
Yeah.
Because what I do is I get on the highway, I go all the way over to the left lane, and then I go as fast as the cars in front of me will allow. And it's a very simple algorithm. It's almost to the point where if my car just needed the software and it had all the controls, I would feel comfortable writing the algorithm to drive my car to work. I'd be fine with that. but it just doesn't have the interface to be able to do it. Like, I could move all the way over to the left, then I could turn on a switch, and then it could beep at me when I need to exit, and then I'd manually exit. So I think what you wanted to talk about, really, though, was fully autonomous cars and what's it going to end up doing to the world, I guess, once they become available.
It's going to be awesome.
Probably?
Did you say probably?
Yeah. I've been trying to think of ways it could be bad, but here, tell me why it would be awesome.
Okay, so I'll give you an analogy. Okay. Sometime around 1830 or 1840 or something, there was an advancement in firearms, and it was the metallic cartridge, which is basically this metal shell casing, and it has gunpowder inside, and it has a primer on the bottom that you strike, and that primer creates sparks inside the casing that ignites the gunpowder, and then there's a bullet on top that's crimped into the casing. And when that powder ignites, it creates a lot of gas that expands, and it pushes the bullet out of the casing down the barrel of the gun. And the reason the metallic cartridge was this huge advancement is beforehand, you had paper cartridge, where you had this rolled up piece of paper with a lead ball and a bunch of gunpowder in it, and you just kind of ripped that open and poured it down the barrel of a gun and then stuffed the ball and the paper in and crammed it down with a rod. Or you had no cartridge, and you poured powder out of some kind of container, usually a powder horn, and then you just took a loose ball and you stuffed it down the barrel. And so the metallic cartridge took everything as one package, and it put it together, and all you had to do was put that one metallic cartridge package into the gun and then fire it, and then the only piece that was left was the empty shell casing with the used primer still inside of it. So the powder was burned up, the bullet was gone. So then the challenge of engineering guns from somewhere around 1840 or so, or 1850, whenever the metallic cartridge came about, the big challenge then was, how do we simplify this process of putting metallic cartridges into guns, shooting them and getting them out, and then putting another one in, and doing this quickly and efficiently and reliably. And so you had this period of just totally wild and reckless experimentation from about 1850 to about 1890 or so. And by the time you get to 1890, all of the types of firearms we're familiar with, even to today, were designed. And so like John Browning's tilting barrel design for handguns was designed, which is the design that basically all handguns you buy today use. Bolt-action rifles and early semi-automatic rifles were designed. Pump-action shotguns were designed. Early machine guns were designed. So by the late 1890s, all of the mechanical design of firearms technology that we still use today was there. And the advancements since then have been in manufacturing, materials, coatings, better tolerances, and other things. But the mechanical system itself is, 120 years old now. But in that interim period from about 1850 to 1890, if you look at guns from that period, there's all these just insane things that people tried because they were like, man, we have this metallic cartridge and it is the future. And I think the metallic cartridge is like autonomous driving. And we're going to see all these wild designs of cars that try to take advantage of autonomous driving in order to accomplish certain tasks. And I think we'll have a much narrower window of this kind of insane, like innovative type of thinking that yields a couple of good ideas in the end and a whole bunch of discarded ideas along the way. And it won't take nearly as long. I think about 20 years and we'll get there. We'll have, a half dozen types of vehicles, maybe, that will be very common, that people will all be very familiar with. And we'll have a bunch of discarded ones that are like, oh yeah, you remember when all of us bought that? It was really stupid and it turned out it was a dumb idea.
Self-driving Segways.
Yeah. So I think we're going to see, I wanted to bring that analogy up because I think we're going to see that kind of thing happen here. And I think it's going to start in 3 or 4 or 5 years, and maybe a little sooner than that. And we're going to see things like, well, most people use the car for commuting and driving in town and mostly for trips that take up to about an hour or so. And for the most part, a car for that doesn't really need to change much if it's fully autonomous. You probably get rid of the steering wheel. You probably take the front seats and you turn them around to face the rear seats. And you probably enter the car from, double doors on the side or something. And maybe there's like a little table with like charging ports for your laptop or something. But for the most part, it's just a car. It doesn't have any special amenity that your car today doesn't have. It's just laid out a little bit differently in the floor plan. But when you look at designs for cars that you might use for longer drives, there are a lot of things that you would want to change. And when you have the opportunity to do something like make a choice between riding in an autonomous car for a trip up to, say, 4 or 5 hours, or go through all the hassle of the TSA and the airlines and get on a plane and do it, I think most people are going to choose going in a car almost all the time for something up to 4 or 5 hours. Beyond that, it may be advantageous time-wise to go on an airline, but before that, it's a draw. It may be faster to drive if it's much less than that, and it's certainly less hassle and less annoyance. And it's probably much more comfortable to go in a car.
Yeah, you can be at least as comfortable as on an airplane because you can have a bigger seat and you can bring a lot more stuff with you and it'll take you door to door.
Yeah. And so I think for situations like that, you'll see cars that are maybe tailored for that, or maybe the average car will just become tailored up to that kind of level of usage. And so maybe they'll add something like a little refrigerator or more entertainment options, or it's kind of an in-between stage because you could drive 4 or 5 hours in a car without stopping. Probably. Or you could just stop and use whatever amenities somewhere and not really feel that inconvenience. But then when you look beyond that, what if you wanted to take a road trip that was 10 or 12 hours from your start to your destination? So in that case, maybe you want an airplane-style lavatory in your car. Or maybe you want a galley. Or maybe you want like full lay-flat seats like they have in first class on Emirates. Or something like that.
Doesn't my car start having to be as big as a pretty large van at that point?
As big as a what?
A pretty large van.
That's okay. What's wrong with that?
Nothing's wrong with that. It'll raise its cost, though.
Sure.
I mean, it would have to cost as much as that van cost, and then it's going to have these additional bits of equipment in it, like the lavatory or whatever. So I feel like what you're talking about here is getting more like an RV. You're like, what if people have self-driving RVs? But right now people have not self-driving RVs, but they're not anywhere near as popular as passenger cars.
Yeah, and I think that autonomous driving gives you a bridge in between what we have now and what a self-driving RV would be.
So I guess what you foresee is RVs will become much more popular if you don't have to drive them. And they'll also get smaller because they'll see more frequent use for smaller trips.
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of people would plan a trip around the idea that you could leave late in the evening and sleep 8 or 9 hours in your car while it drove you.
Yeah, probably so.
Because, I don't think I'm really that into RVing. And a lot of the reason would be, oh, great, I get to drive all day. Then I get to stop and sleep so that tomorrow I can drive again. That really sucks.
Yeah. Do you feel like you could sleep really well being automatically driven? I don't sleep all that great in cars.
But what if you were laying flat? Would that help?
Probably. I do feel like my head position is a lot of the reason I have trouble sleeping in a car. It's really hard to, like, pin your head where it's still, like you can do with a pillow and a bed.
Mm-hmm.
So if I could lay flat, that might help. I can sleep in cars, so I guess it would only help.
So I think we're going to see a lot of things like this come from major manufacturers. Obviously, most of their lineup will still be just normal, regular driving. but I think we'll see them add options like this. And I think we'll see a lot of aftermarket options where companies will be like, well, what if we could just add a freshwater tank and a gray water tank and put a lavatory in a van? Would somebody buy that and let us hook it up? Let's see.
Yeah. When you said freshwater tank, I was thinking you were going to say, and a saltwater tank, and then we have 2 aquariums.
We could have such a variety of fish.
You could bring your fish on your road trip with you. Are you tired of leaving your fish at home?
I miss them so badly when I go RVing.
They get so lonely without me.
Yeah. My biggest worries are that we'll get there with the technology, and then a bunch of do-gooders will step in to save us from ourselves. And then we'll get all kinds of rules like, if you unhook your seatbelt, it pulls off to the side. Or if you stand up to walk around, it pulls off to the side, and then it lectures you before it goes again.
Yeah, hopefully that'll vary by state level. So there'll be the one state that's really good for autonomous driving. Everyone will be like, let's road trip through Montana. So the way I see it being interesting, and I would say the main source of our discussions at work about this are, like, we care a lot about Uber and Lyft and things like that. And Uber has been very clear that one day they will fire all of their drivers that they say they value so much and replace them with autonomous driving. I don't know why they love telling all their drivers this. It doesn't seem like it would engender a sense of loyalty, but whatever. And so Uber's model is there's all these cars out there, and there are people who would be willing to drive them, and the car has 3 extra seats in it, and so people would probably pay for those seats if they could in order to be driven to other locations. And it turns out they're super right. They've made billions of dollars, I think, with that model. There's like excess car seats that can be moved around. So with autonomous driving, there'd be 1 extra car seat, and the car is less restricted. Like, the car can work 24 hours a day or whatever. And so the path that I see fully autonomous cars going is there would be a lot less car ownership in the future. And I feel like something that you've sort of been implicitly saying in a lot of your discussion about, like, the souped up RV cars is that people would still privately own their own car. Whereas what I see in the future is only rich people own their own car. And to some extent, they'll be seen as being eccentric for doing so. Kind of like people who have 2 houses now. Like, there's an obvious use case for 2 houses, but I think a lot of people are like, yeah. They're like, oh, you summer in the Hamptons or whatever it is. Like, only wealthy people do this, and it's a little weird that they do it or whatever. And I think owning your own car might be seen as kind of weird like that, because it'll be like, well, if you can hail a car from your phone and one of them just, like, pulls off the street and at your house in a minute, like, why would you own a car? And so then you can just use the car for the time that you need to take a trip somewhere, and then the car lets you off, and then the car's like, bye, and it goes and picks up a different fare. And I think if you have autonomous cars and you have a lot of them, especially if you can upgrade existing cars, there will be a lot of incentive to upgrade a car and then sort of put it in the pool of autonomous taxis. And so I see a future where it's like how no one owns subways and just no one will own the cars. Well, a few entities will own the cars. And so that's all cool. Like, if you imagine I step outside of my house and I get a ride to wherever, that's really neat. But then the thing that I'm interested in discussing with people is sort of the dark side of that, which is, what will governments do when they see this opportunity to seize a bunch of power over their citizens? Like, if people want to protest, they're all going to take these cars somewhere, right? And the cars are running software that's not under the person's control, and they're owned by a company that's not under the person's control. But the government can coerce those companies, and they will always set it up in such a way where they can coerce those companies. There's not going to be foreign-owned cars driving on foreign roads where the government has no way to coerce that company to do stuff. And so then I think they'll start saying, well, whenever there's going to be a protest in an area, we don't want anyone to be struck by a self-driving car, so self-driving cars are banned from a 10-mile radius around that protest area. And then, oh, turnout to the protest is really low. That's amazing. Everyone must actually really like the government a lot. And high-profile people will get killed in freak self-driving car accidents. And then people will be like, did someone hack the car and make it kill them? And they'll be like, well, all the people who are interested in maybe killing this person did an investigation, and they found that nothing was amiss. And I think we'll see some things like that, especially in more dictatorial countries. It'll probably happen a lot more frequently. But I do sort of worry about this future where nobody owns anything and nobody has any control over anything, and only a few entities have control, and they'll always selfishly do what's best for them. And it'll mostly be okay, but at the margins it will not be okay, and no one will really have the power to do anything about it.
I'm surprised that you're really convinced that a large proportion of people would not want to own their own cars.
I think they'll want to. I don't think it will be cost effective for them to do so.
I don't know. I think car ownership in America is highly cost effective. We have something like zero point 0.8 cars per adult.
I'm trying to think if a self-driving car would cost more. I know when we were driving through Oregon, though, we saw a lot of vehicles that were owned by somebody, but no one is ever going to drive them ever again. It seems like in rural communities in Oregon, you don't replace your car, you just get more cars. And then you retire the old car to your front yard.
I think that's a rural community thing everywhere in the country. If you just go on Google Maps and you start looking in rural areas anywhere in the country and you zoom all the way into houses, every house in a rural area will have a graveyard of old cars and boats out behind it.
Yeah. I've seen that in Texas too.
It's just simpler to dump them in your yard than to dispose of them properly.
Yeah, I guess. In California, you're supposed to register them as non-operable, but I don't know what you do. I guess you just stop registering them and you'll never get a ticket because you're never driving the vehicle. I don't know. Or maybe cops come around to rural properties once in a while when they want to harass people, and then they give them a ticket for every vehicle they see.
Yeah,
you got overdue registration.
Yeah, that's not a thing in Texas.
Maybe you take the plates off, and then it's really hard for anyone to do anything.
If you just park the car over your burning tire fire, then it takes care of itself.
You could chain up all your junkyard dogs around it. Yeah, you're welcome to inspect the VIN if you want to. Just watch out for old Bitey there. He likes to pee on people. Okay, so there's lots of car ownership in the US. But what if you could spend that money on something else? Would you want to? I mean, you know where I live in the Bay Area. So there's a lot of people here who are really proud to not own a car, which is weird to me because I come from like urban Texas where you have to own a car. And so from my perspective, owning a car is like a thing adults do. Like children don't have cars, adults all have cars. And so when someone's like, I don't have a car, it's like, are you a kid? I know that's not how it works. But in, say, San Francisco, there's a lot of people who are like, oh, I don't own a car. I just Uber wherever I need to go. And I have a bike and I take the BART and Caltrain and the other one, Muni, and I don't know, my unicycle the rest of the time or whatever it is. And it's become increasingly popular to just use Uber and Lyft to fill in the gaps that the terrible public transportation doesn't fill. And that gets you everywhere you need to go as long as you're willing to spend the money. And I guess you have to have a smartphone, which is not a big requirement.
I guess I can concede that there is a pathway to that future. Because you're showing that it already exists in a small amount in highly dense cities where people are getting rid of cars.
Yeah, and these are people who are very high income. Like, table stakes to live in San Francisco is pretty high. It's really hard to live there if you have a minimum wage job. We have the highest real estate prices in the country. And there are still people who are like, oh, I don't own a car. I don't want to. Or they say, it's kind of expensive, which it kind of is. And the other effect would be, imagine that you're a child who grows up always being able to hail a self-driving car to take you wherever with your phone. And then, I don't know, maybe children would be able to own cars if they're fully autonomous. I guess I hadn't really thought about that. You buy your kid their first car when they're 10 or whatever. But if you grow up always using these cars, you might be like, well, why would I need to buy one?
Yeah, the whole case of children with autonomous cars is one of those areas where I'm worried the do-gooders will step in to help me. So I want to be able to just stick my kid in a car and dispatch it to go somewhere.
You totally can right now, and it's awesome. I was talking to an Uber driver about that, and he was saying they have some age limit. Like, they can't pick up people younger than 12 or something without an 18-year-old there, I think it was. So, like, elder sibling, I guess. Except that most Uber drivers will do it. And I believe he knew of someone who was supposed to pick up a 10-year-old girl, and she had used her dad's account to hail the ride. And then they were like, you're too young. I'm not supposed to pick you up. Like, it's a policy violation. And so she was like, okay. And so then they left. And then she just, like, hailed the next car who did pick her up. And then that guy got some complaint filed against him. And then Uber talked to him, and he got in trouble with Uber, and he was in danger of losing his position as a driver with them. And so he's like, all right, I'll just pick up girls from now on, whatever. And I think it's really great, because before, I remember being a kid in Texas, and if my parents wouldn't drive me somewhere, I had no way to get any place. And it would have been really awesome to be able to just hail a ride. And it's like, yeah, you got to trust this anonymous stranger, but you do that all the time anyways.
Mm-hmm. At least you're hailing them.
Yeah, and if you're some, like, stranger who wants to mess with kids, I don't think driving for Uber is really the best way to do it. You create this huge paper trail and record of yourself.
It doesn't exactly optimize your chances for interaction.
Yeah, and yeah, it just seems really dumb. So, like, I don't know, I can see some parents being afraid of that, but not enough of them.
So I wonder if that will be kind of like with parents who buy their child a gun. And they're like, I have to buy this gun, but I'm buying it for you. And so legally, the parent buys the autonomous car. And then they're like, yeah, it's your car. Just go places when you want to.
Yeah, that would probably happen. The other thing that's really neat, just because, like, Uber exists, not even autonomous cars, is there are all these other people, like, anyone who's had a DUI, which I don't really care about helping them, but whatever. They're not allowed to drive. They can at least get somewhere. There's blind people, really old people, people who for some reason don't want to drive or can't, like people with epilepsy or something like that. And all of these car sharing services really empower those people. And so if those people could own a fully autonomous vehicle, that'd be even better, because then they don't have to trust anyone to be able to drive somewhere.
And people who can't stop speeding all the time. And people who just goddamn don't know that there's a turn signal on their car.
All BMW drivers. I can confirm none of them here know how to use their turn signal. I think they take their car in once a month to have the turn signals dusted off. They're like, I don't know what this thing is. It's just there to gather dust.
Just make sure it's still unhooked. If I need to signal another driver, I just stick my middle finger out the window. It's my experience when I visited San Francisco.
Yeah. One day you'll have to tell us about that.
This is a good time. We're talking about cars in San Francisco.
Today is the day.
I visited Blake in San Francisco in April of 2013 for a week.
I don't actually live in San Francisco.
Just south of San Francisco, though still in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
So my wife and I came to San Francisco, the Bay Area, to visit Blake and his wife, and stayed with them for a week. And I'm a calm, lawful driver. I have one moving violation in my entire driving history, and it was, like 17 years ago. I rarely speed. I always use a turn signal. So, I'm a very good driver. In fact, I'm probably the safest driver you would see on the road today. And in 1 week in San Francisco, I saw more middle fingers directed at me than I have seen in the entire total of my driving life. And, we had various theories. I would discuss this mostly with Blake's wife when we were there that week, and she had some great theories on why it was. There was one instance I was just that we were at this three-way stop and I was pulling up and there was another gentleman and we were approaching the three-way stop from the two directions that face each other. And apparently we were both going straight, or I wanted to turn left and he wanted to go straight. And so, I was going to have to cross him. And I had my signal on and I pulled up and I was going to make a complete stop and I was going to be able to stop before he did. And I pulled to a complete stop, but the fact that I made a complete stop, he took as an indication that he should just not stop at all, roll through it, and give me the middle finger out the window as he came by. Because I had the audacity to want to make a complete stop and expect him to stop too. So it was the weirdest thing, because, I mean, it's not like I was mad dogging him or anything out the window, or I don't know, but I got a middle finger for it. And then we were driving downtown in San Francisco. We were trying to go to the Asian Art Museum. And we were driving around downtown looking for a parking space. God help us. And we were trying to make a right turn. And there was a pedestrian crossing the street. And she was walking a dog. And, the light is green for us to make the right turn. But I'm waiting for her to cross, and she clears the crosswalk, and I start to turn, and I don't know what the deal is. She, gets mad that, I'm turning into the crosswalk that she just cleared. So she, jumps backwards into the crosswalk in front of my car and puts herself into danger to start yelling at my car and swearing and giving me the middle finger and saying that I was trying to run her down and that I was being rude and lots of cussing and everything. And at first I was just kind of dumbfounded. I was like, that's really odd that you cleared the crosswalk and you were on the sidewalk. And then I started turning through the intersection and you re-entered the crosswalk to stop me, to yell at me. And so I just kind of gave her the most blank look that I could and just sat there. And then I just sat on the horn. And I was like, I know the car horn is in the front of the grill right where you're standing. So I know this is very loud. And so I just pressed the horn and I just stayed on it. And she was screaming at me and yelling and shaking her finger and then flipping me off and everything. And you could see the whole time she's doing this, she's looking around, looking for moral support from other pedestrians. And other people are just kind of walking by what's wrong with this lady? And so I'm just sitting there on the horn the whole time and just looking at her with the most blank look I could give her. Because I didn't want to get into it with her and fuel her that way. I wanted to fuel her with my apathy and with the really loud horn. And so I just did that. And after probably 30 or 40 seconds, she finally just left the crosswalk because she wasn't getting the reaction she wanted. But man, I'm sure she's a peach to live with. But apparently you can get a ticket in San Francisco for using your horn. I didn't know that, but Blake's wife told me that later.
Yeah, I believe you're only supposed to use it to essentially signal that your car is there if you believe someone hasn't visibly realized that it's there. But you're not allowed to use it to just express your apathy.
I had so much apathy to express.
No matter how much apathy you might be full of. Sounds like you had a lot.
I don't know. The place did seem pretty full of highly entitled pedestrians and drivers.
Second only to NASA campus.
Oh, man. I remember some of the looks we would get there when you would dare to even enter the crosswalk before someone cleared.
Mm-hmm. Once their foot touches the crosswalk, the entire thing is off limits to all vehicles. Yeah. So actually, we should just explain that because people are not going to understand how bad the pedestrian situation is at NASA.
Mm-hmm.
So the speed limit there was, 15?
I thought it was 25. I don't recall, though.
No, I remember 25 is school zones, and it was slower than school zones.
Okay. Yeah, you're probably right.
They were like, little children have a lot of trouble watching out for cars, and if you hit them, they might get injured. But NASA scientists, they're worse than little children, so we gotta have a lower speed limit. And the way that people crossed the crosswalk at NASA was they would simply stride into the crosswalk, without looking up from whatever it was they were holding in their hands. They never looked up. They would just be looking at their phone or a binder or whatever. They just walk into the crosswalk because, of course, all the cars will stop for them, right? No one's died yet. So they would just stride into the crosswalk. And then if they happen to notice any cars on the ground around them while looking at their feet, then they would give that person a really dirty look or whatever. And sometimes they would look up and notice that someone had touched the crosswalk 30 feet away from them. And then they'd give them a dirty look because how dare they? The crosswalk is sacred space. And I found it really irritating. And I really enjoyed hearing stories about people almost getting run over at the mall because they tried to apply the NASA rules to mall crosswalks. And they didn't work there. And I really wish NASA had just encouraged people to use the regular style of crossing crosswalks. It would be terrible if some brilliant NASA scientist gets run over at the mall because of this. Like, you shouldn't have two sets of rules for how it works. But whatever. It ended up being its own little culture of silliness. But self-driving cars would never run over a pedestrian.
Unless that pedestrian...
Unless he got outbid.
Yes, unless he failed to bid high enough in the auction.
So, do you now feel like it's more likely that fewer people would own their own cars?
I understand the argument, and I think there will be a section of people who will decide that that will work for them. I don't know to what extent I'd be willing to agree that, you know, what percentage of the population that would turn into, if it would even be 5% or 10% of the population. I'm not sure.
I think it'd be a large percentage of the population, but if you were to do something like color counties in the US,
right,
it would be in all the urban areas.
Right.
Because people in the rural communities are probably a lot of them are still going to want manual driving capability. Like in the same way that you still see four-wheel, all-wheel drive cars in a lot of places, because people are like, what if I got to take it off-road? And it's like, you can drive a Honda Civic off-road. They're like, I don't know, sometimes there's mud. Whatever. Get your 4x4. Yeah. But I think a lot of people in urban areas would just be fine with never owning a car. I would also argue that this is an issue I care a lot about in terms of software. I feel like a lot of people don't even realize it, but they don't really even own their own computer anymore. They own the physical device, but the thing that the computer does for you, which is compute, they don't really own the computation. Like if you own an iPhone, you don't really own it. You're essentially leasing it indefinitely from Apple. But the only reason that it suffers to do the things that it does is because Apple wills it to be so. And Apple can remotely disable your phone in a lot of ways, and they can remotely alter the behavior of it. And it's like you have this little device, and I forgot if I've made this analogy before, but it's like you have this device, and it has its own little like government on it. It gets to decide what you can and can't do and how it will and won't operate. And it has this code on it, and the code is like the law. It decides what stuff will happen, and you don't get to write any of that. You're not even allowed to. Apple writes it. And if the phone ever decides that you're not allowed to use it, then you're not. That's too bad. And so if you own a Windows 10 machine, for the most part, you own something that has this remote tether that goes back to Microsoft, and the Microsoft can remotely control what your computer does. And Windows 10 in its default configuration is effectively spyware. Like it logs all your keystrokes, it logs all the websites you go to, it logs all your files. It knows a huge amount about your system. And in theory, Microsoft's not doing anything particularly harmful with this information, but they do have it. And they have a fair amount of control over your machine. And some Google devices are sort of getting that way. Like a Chromebook is effectively that way. A Chromebook is just like this portal that goes to a tether and leads back to Google, and Google controls your machine. And so I think that self-driving cars will work that way. If you have autonomous cars, and in particular ones people don't own, then like that's what they're going to do. Even if you own your own car, you're not going to really own it. Like you can't maintain it. You're not going to be able to change that software. You don't know what's going on in there. And so the car is only going to do stuff that the company owning it allows you to do. Like if a company that owns a fleet of self-driving cars can figure out how to extract value out of the cars, by having them do something that isn't exactly in the consumer's best interest, they will figure out a way to do that. And if that thing is of high enough value, they'll figure out how to make a self-driving car offering that incentivizes consumers to choose them, even though it works slightly against their own best interests. Like a trivial example I can come up with is if there's a way to sell user ride data to third-party companies in order to make some amount of money, then they can offer a deal on rides where it is cheaper by like 80% of the amount that they earn by reselling that data.
Right.
And then they'll keep it a secret as long as they can. And then eventually there'll be this revelation. Oh, self-driving car company, it sells your data. And everyone will be like, oh, we're outraged. Let's try and get a law passed. And maybe they will, and maybe they won't. And then everyone will settle back into complacency and be like, well, I always knew that I didn't have any privacy when I was riding in those cars, whatever. And then that company can go on reselling that data. And then you only get to find out what the negative consequences are far in the future when they bite you somehow. So I think because of that ability to earn that extra money, I think we could see a lot fewer people own their own cars than you would otherwise expect. Because it's not just going to be like, is it cheaper to own the car myself or cheaper to take Uber self-driving? It'll be more like, is it cheaper to own the car myself or cheaper to take Uber self-driving that has all these discounts because they do all these things that aren't exactly in my favor, but I don't know about them.
Right.
And so you'll do the math, you'll make the Excel spreadsheet or whatever it is, and it'll be like, gosh, it costs like half as much to not own my own car. And it's because you're sacrificing things like privacy and the ability to always have the car around and a couple of other things like that. The ability to make sure that you don't have any other passengers in the car, whatever. And so I think that might also affect it. Like, I guess kind of, it's not the best analogy, but something you see now is people live in apartments. Apartments have a lot of these trade-offs. Like, you don't own your own physical piece of property, and you have to share walls with neighbors, and you have to obey someone else's rules, and they can kick you out, and there's all these other things. But then there's these advantages, like, it's cheaper in a lot of ways because the walls can be shared.
Mm-hmm.
And so they don't have to build an extra copy of every single wall that you end up needing. And plumbing is shared and the land is shared. Parking is shared. And so apartments are a pretty good deal. And a lot of people live in apartments. I sort of see a future where people own almost nothing.
Except stock in companies that own everything.
Yeah, that'll be the closest they can get. I think also that's sort of a natural product of capitalism, right? That's what you're trying for. It's like private citizens, they own the means of production, and they use those to try and earn a profit. And so if capitalism continues to succeed, eventually you would expect most of the capital to be centralized into the few entities who are able to outcompete all the others. And so you might have a single corporation that owns a large percentage of the cars and a large percentage of the housing and computers and everything in, say, the US. Like, you'll live in your Amazon provided house and take Amazon self-driving car rides, and you'll have an Amazon phone, and you won't really own any of these things. You'll just get them on demand. And you better never mess with Amazon because they'll ban you, and then you'll be homeless with no way to get around and no way to communicate.
Don't talk bad about Bezos. You paint quite the dark picture of it. I plan to just buy an autonomous car and enjoy the hell out of it.
Everywhere I look, I see dystopias. It's... I don't know.
Are you never reassured by the fact that government tends to be so incompetent? Or is the dystopia itself a product of the incompetence? I guess that's the real problem. Because it's corporations that exploit the dysfunction of government to create the dystopia.
So you're assuming the government is on the side of being slightly malicious here.
Mm-hmm.
And they would be more so if they were more capable.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, corporations are very efficient. And they're not malicious in particular. They're just amoral in that they don't have morals. And so they will not align with your interests. It's really similar to what we talked about in the AI podcast. It's not that the corporation is bad or evil. It's just that its interests are different from yours, and it has a great deal more power than you do. And so, as more and more power accretes into corporations, I see the potential for dystopia increasing all the time. Yeah, I guess that's really it. I'm not as concerned about the government. Also, the government can't really do a lot on its own. It has to contract out to corporations anyway.
Yeah, and at some point, corporations in aggregate become much more powerful than the government.
At some point. You mean like 10 years ago or so? Like, I think we've crossed that point a long, long time ago. Like, Twitter could ban the president.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he thinks about it very much. There's probably people at Twitter who've advocated for it already. I wouldn't be surprised. Or they advocated for it while he was still a candidate. I had one other speculative idea. I don't think I've ever presented this to you.
Okay.
So you know how containerization of shipping was a really big deal.
Right.
I think that the potential to containerize overland shipping with smaller containers exists, and I don't think anyone has really taken advantage of it. And what I'm imagining are containers that could fit on the seats of passenger cars. So for the listeners, Craig is making a really strange face here.
Yeah, I just don't see that would ever be efficient. You're talking something in the range of like 6 cubic feet.
Yeah. So this probably doesn't affect you very much, but we get a lot of stuff delivered. We get all of our groceries delivered from, I think, like 3 separate sources. A lot of it comes from Amazon Fresh. And we get a lot of food delivered. Like, we'll get sushi delivered or a hamburger or whatever. And we get a lot of Amazon deliveries. And they come through USPS, UPS, whatever. And the way that they deliver them right now essentially looks like the way that ships were loaded and unloaded before containerization. Where you have all these individual snowflakes of containers, like sometimes it's a bag, sometimes a box, whatever it is. Like Google, I believe, has flipped between boxes and bags several times. Amazon sends us these reusable green Velcro plastic bags, but they're like a box. They're very sturdy, so they're their own box, but they have handles. And everyone's still experimenting with what the best way to really containerize all their stuff is. And so something I expect to eventually happen is they'll unify on a single container. And they'll be like, 2 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet is a good size or something like that. And I think there's real potential there. Like, make rigid plastic boxes that have handles on them and certain specifications, and they can be stacked really, really high. And they fit maybe too high on the seat of a passenger car and like 3 or 4 in the trunk. And then what you could do if you have these is you could start doing stuff like just having a conveyor belt at a fulfillment center, and it outputs these cubicle containers or whatever, and they all have like a QR code on them, and it says what they are and their ultimate destination. But most importantly, it says what to do with them next. So someone can pull up in a car or truck or whatever, grab all the containers that would be appropriate for them, and then they take them to the next hub. And then those get distributed to smaller and smaller things until they're eventually in like single passenger cars, and they get taken to their endpoints. And if everything is standardized, then you would start seeing stuff like people building vans that have racks in them, and they just accept the cubes. And they try to maximize for how many cubes can I accept in my vehicle. And people would do things like build little autonomous robots that are like electric powered with little tank treads, and they can go drop it off at someone's doorway. So you drive a van somewhere, and then the robot gets out, and it goes and takes the thing over, and then comes back. And it could do it faster than a human could do it walking. And I think that there's a lot of incentives for all of this stuff to happen. Like, if you can build rigid, durable containers, it sort of lowers the cost of shipping materials, especially if you get them back from people after you drop off stuff. If you standardize the sizes, it means you can build vehicles that try to maximize carrying capacity. It means you can build things that handle the last mile, like a self-driving little electric tank tread robot or whatever. And I'm not sure. It sounds like you're skeptical, but
yeah, I'm skeptical because I think you introduce a lot of volumetric inefficiency.
That's true.
Because when you just want a hamburger for dinner, you don't need an 8 cubic foot box to deliver a hamburger.
That's true.
And so you could argue that the solution to that is you have a 1 by 1 by 1 and a 1 by 2 by 1 and then a 2 by 2 by 2.
Yeah.
And so you have three different types, and then they stack, and they're still simple to stack, and then they even have like small notches or somehow, so they kind of snap together nicely, without wasting too much more volume.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm imagining. Like how you have half containers now for shipping containers.
Yeah, but even then, you will lower the volumetric inefficiency, but you'll still have a lot more, and so you'll have to, in designing the system, you'll have to try and balance how much time do we waste now when a UPS driver has to stack boxes that are of 100 different sizes in his truck versus how many extra trucks do we have to send because there's so much empty volume?
Yeah, I could be wrong here. I do know someone who worked as a person who packed the back of UPS trucks, and he took a lot of pride in his efficiency at doing so.
Yeah, I've seen photos of that, and I would encourage people to just go hit Google and find photos of that, because they do just pack all these hundreds of different shaped boxes into the back, and they try to do it in a way to use up all the volume. And apparently they get good at that, and it's done in some way so that they can then go deliver them efficiently.
Yeah, they also have to pack them in reverse delivery order, so the driver can always just grab whatever's in the back of the truck.
Yeah.
And if they misorder a package, then it just doesn't get delivered on that run.
I think it's probably better to just work on robots who can handle all of these deliveries and that can just handle any size box. And then you have a couple of breakpoints of robots. And so you have robots that can handle small boxes, and then robots that can handle kind of big boxes. And then you have robots that do like shipping containers that are basically just autonomous helicopters and autonomous trucks and things like that.
You're shattering my vision of a tiny containerized future.
I'm sorry, I just don't think it'll work out.
It might not. I've just often thought that when I see delivery drivers dealing with all of their different stupid containers and how few containers they can actually bring. And I've wondered, what if you made it a whole lot more efficient? But maybe that wouldn't make it more efficient.
So the advance that preceded shipping containers was palletization. And that came about in, I think, like right before World War II or during World War II. Like the standard pallet was designed. And that was a huge advancement too, because then you could just move a pallet instead of having longshoremen load and unload individual boxes. And so it increased your efficiency of loading and unloading like train cars by like 50x. And so I think what you should do is redo your analysis, but start it from a standpoint of historically, we gained the efficiency of designing the pallet first. And then we said, that's great. Now let's design the container, the shipping container. And then think about if there's a way to go in reverse of that and go down to this cube level idea that you have. And so add another historical data point to your analysis and see if it makes sense.
Okay, I'll do that.
Well, that's how I try to solve problems. Because a lot of times I'll think of some complex problem like this, and I'll think, it's kind of hopeless for me to sit here and think that I'll come up with the solution right now. And so I'll just add it to the list in my mind of problems that I'm thinking about. And maybe for a week or two, I'll just think about it once in a while, and eventually I'll come around to the solution.
That's the Richard Feynman technique of solving problems.
But I find that I don't really have success by just sitting and thinking and thinking and thinking about a problem a lot at once.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I have a lot more success if I've been at work and I've been like, writing a bunch of software for a couple hours and doing a bunch of stuff at work. And then like, I'll just sit back in my chair and then I'll think about, could all these cube boxes that Blake's talking about work? And then I'll think of some great reason why or why not all of a sudden. And that always works well for me.
One of the things I was imagining is that you could add more hops to trips than exist right now. Because for a lot of delivery that we get, the truck leaves the place where the good is. In the case of food, it's the restaurant where the good is manufactured. And in the case of shipping, it leaves like an Amazon fulfillment center or whatever. And then it makes a single drive to where we are. but often it's driving right next to other delivery trucks or cars on the highway. And so I was just thinking, what if you could add additional stops to the trip? But then the problem is, like, people have to hand off the goods a bunch of times. They have to fit in all the different vehicles, and the goods themselves need to identify where they're going. And so if you could standardize everything, that would help a lot. But if you just don't standardize everything, if it's like cardboard boxes and then a QR code with like an open standard of what the QR code is, maybe that gets you like 99% of the way there. The other thing I was imagining is you could automate some of the handling this way. Like you could have a robot that can unload a truck and then distribute the parcels to waiting cars or whatever. Whereas if you have different size boxes, that automation is a lot farther away.
I know there was a company a couple years ago working on the idea of having a truck that could drive to a neighborhood and do something like park on a cul-de-sac or something. And then it would just deploy a bunch of UAVs and they would take off and deliver packages within the neighborhood. And so it would kind of take all of the packages to this almost central location, almost to the end destination. And then it would deploy a bunch of smaller deliveries from there.
Isn't it really silly to have them fly, though?
Yeah, well, I think that was like right after Amazon had released the video with the Top Gear guy, and everybody was like, obviously the way to do it is with drones. And so everybody was jumping on that bandwagon.
Oh. Because it seems like obviously the way to do it is with wheels or treads or something like that. Like going over the ground is so much more efficient. I don't know. I'll have to think about it more. The other thing that holds me back from trying to consider this as a serious problem is the real benefit of containerization was that nobody had a patent, copyright, trademark, or whatever on the containers. It was this open standard and everyone could copy them. And so whoever invents the tiny cube container really needs to make it an open standard for it to be wildly successful, which also puts them in a position to never profit from it ever. So they would really need to be like the first company that's making the containers and doing the shipping with them, and then make it so that they're the best supplier of the containers even when the market gets commoditized. And good luck competing with China. So I think unless you do some kind of thing like slap a blockchain on it to keep solitary control over it, you're going to have a lot of trouble profiting from it. And so it's more of like a interesting toy idea than something that I would ever be interested in working on. Like, say you invented the metal cartridge for firearms.
Yeah, the metallic cartridge.
Whoever did that didn't make a lot of money from it, did they?
I don't know. I don't know the history of the inventor.
If they were first and they patented it and they were the only supplier for a while, they probably made a lot of money. But I bet everyone tried to copy them really fast.
I think that's what did happen, because you had other like weird variations on it that all got thrown by the wayside, like pin fire and rim fire, which is still popular, but kind of only for small applications.
22 LR.
Yes. And there are a couple other like historical types of weird variations on metallic cartridges that I think were probably only existed to get around patents.
Mm. For people who aren't firearm enthusiasts, the main way that rounds work right now is a pin hammers the center of the back of it, and that's what ignites it and fires the bullet. But for rim fire, which is probably the second most popular kind,
yes,
the rim of the round, it protrudes slightly, like you can hold it with your fingernails, and that rim gets crimped really hard by the gun, and that's what fires it. And so it has primer all around the radius of this rim, and then it gets crimped from the side. And I don't know why those things still exist or are as popular as they are. It seems kind of dumb.
It's the kind of thing where there are probably somewhere on the order of 150 million guns in the US that are chambered in 22 LR, and people like it. And so companies continue to build guns and sell guns in that round. And so ammunition manufacturers continue to make the round. And so it's just really hard to get everybody to agree that on Thursday we're going to switch and stop using that.
What if we wait until Friday?
We'll have to do it on Monday.
Okay.
Because another issue is like the 12 gauge shotgun shell. The 12 gauge shotgun shell is like a terrible round. Like the design of the cartridge itself with its rim is really holding back advancement of shotguns. But you can't get away from it because it's so prolific. There's so many hundreds of millions of 12 gauge shotguns in the US, and nobody is going to be the first person to buy like a shotgun chambered in the new fancy untested shotgun shell round that nobody supports.
What if you made a shotgun that could accept 12 gauge center fire and 12 gauge rim fire, and it had a pin and a crimper, and it could fire either, and then you're like, get the center fire ones.
Yeah, and the issue with the shotgun is not center and rim fire, because shotgun shells are all center fire, but the issue is just other geometry problems with the 12 gauge shotgun shell. And
yeah, I didn't think they were rim fire.
It is a rimmed cartridge, but it has a rim that protrudes beyond the diameter of the rest of the case. But the 12 gauge shotgun shell itself holds back the ability of manufacturers to design better shotguns.
Okay, tell us what's wrong with it. I want to know.
Oh, what you would really want is a rebated rim, which means a rim that whose radius is less than the radius of the rest of the shell.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is for feeding and extraction and usage in magazines mainly. When you're feeding up in a magazine and you have a protruding rim, the rims will interact as they feed through the magazine, and you can get feeding problems with that. If you have a rebated rim, and then they can never interact one round to the next. And so it simplifies making magazine-fed shotguns, which is something there are a few on the market. They're not as popular as I think they would be if the round worked better.
Oh yeah, that's true. I was thinking there's a lot of like tube-fed shotguns, but I guess that's why.
Correct. That's exactly why, is because it's a rimmed cartridge. So there are a few magazine-fed shotguns, but if the 12-gauge shotgun shell were a better round, if it were a rebated rim, I think we would see a lot more magazine-fed shotguns and just a lot better shotguns in general.
Has anyone tried to solve this?
Yeah, so there are companies that have designed essentially rebated rim 12-gauge shotgun shells and release the standard. There is a way in the firearms world to open source the standard for a round. And the problem is none of the manufacturers want to create guns for it because none of the ammunition companies make ammo for it. And they don't want to make ammo because there's no guns out there. And nobody wants to buy either because it's expensive because there's no economy of scale. So it's very hard to get the ball rolling on that, something like that, even when it's a good idea. What you need, and where you see things like that have success in the gun world, is what starts off as a boutique cartridge is what it's kind of derisively called at the beginning. And it'll have some very special purpose, and it will gain popularity over a couple of years, and then it will become more and more popular and kind of get a cult following, and then it becomes mainstream eventually. And it's just hard to do this with shotguns. Also because shotguns in the gun world are kind of like helicopters in the airplane world or in the aviation world. No one spends as much money researching helicopters and rotary wing aviation as they do on fixed wing aviation. Nobody really cares as much to advance the technology of rotary wing as they do fixed wing. And so helicopters are perpetually behind airplanes in terms of technology. And it's the same with shotguns compared to things like rifles.
Well, aren't shotguns just not as useful?
Yes, because people have not invested in them.
Well, do you think they ever could be?
I think they could close a lot of the gap.
Because it seems like on the one end there's pistols, and they're popular because they're small, concealable, easily carryable. Like, I guess you could have the shotgun pistols, but I'm not sure what advantage you could get out of that. Maybe something. And then on the other end you have rifles, and rifles are popular because they have like extreme accuracy and a long effective range. And then because of the size of the weapon, they're really easy to control. I guess you could get that with shotguns, but then a shotgun sort of implicitly does not offer a long effective range. So you're saying, I don't want a long effective range. I want shot, But then why do you want shot? Like, what huge advantages does it offer? Lack of over penetration? I mean, do you shoot slugs with your new futuristic shotguns? And then if you're shooting slugs, why are you shooting them from a smooth bore? Maybe you should rifle the bore, and then now you have rifles. Like, if everyone invested tons and tons of money in shotguns, like, say the US government banned pistols and rifles somehow. I don't know how that happens. So all the gun manufacturers complained for a while, and then they're like, okay, we're all shotguns all the time now. And there's this diaspora. People are building handgun shotguns, sort of rifle shotguns. Like, what could a shotgun really offer that's so great?
I think what it could offer is a large volumetric payload. And so you have a lot of room inside the shell to get creative, to do things with bullet designs, with slug designs, with varied loads, with sabos, with all kinds of exotic payloads.
But they already make those. There are those websites where you can go buy the most ridiculous shotgun shells.
Yeah, you can buy like bolo rounds and ones that spit fire and stuff and stupid things like that. But people don't invest serious money into developing things like that because they have rifles.
But do you think, gosh, if only someone invested a lot of R&D into bola rounds, then we could have these amazing bola shotguns, and then we'd be able to trip all our burglars who break into the house at night. Like, what are you going to do with them? Or if only we could get really good fire-spitting rounds, then we could burn down the whole forest with only one shot. Like, what are you hoping for here? Which of these rounds is $1 million of R&D away from being a really effective joke round?
It somehow plants its own flag that says bang.
You could get really good whistle rounds. You shoot them out and they make this really annoying noise. Now that I think about it, do whistle rounds exist? I kind of want one.
I've never seen that.
It would work, right? You could have a flying whistle.
Yeah, I guess you would need it. It would have to be rifled so it would stabilize, so that the air would go through the whistle and it wouldn't tumble.
It could just be aerodynamic. We got a lot of room in the cartridge, you see.
Yeah.
For varied payloads.
Like folding fins and stuff.
Yeah. I'm going to find some YouTubers who make stupid shotgun rounds, and I'm going to be like, whistles. Fill them with whistles.
Oh, Demolition Ranch is what you want.
Yeah, we'll see what they can do. Also, I bet this is going to be the first in many podcasts where all our podcasts converge on talking about weapon design. How could we weaponize self-driving cars?
Why would we need to? We can find people who will drive car bombs already.
What about in countries that are impoverished of suicide bombers?
Is there a country where you can put together explosives for a suicide car bomb but fail to find a driver? And you don't even have to find a suicide car bomber. You just have to tell some guy and convince him to drive a car to a place. You don't have to tell him what the payload is.
Maybe this is an argument against containerization.
It's all bombs. Here's another container of Anfo.
Yeah. There is a joke in the Silicon Valley startup community around startups that are getting into products that are a lot more dangerous than they seem to realize or have respect for. And so the joke is always farming supplies on demand, and they'll deliver fuel oil and ammonium nitrate to your door in a single tanker truck, and you can order it anywhere. That is like the canonical joke. They're like, oh yeah, we're disrupting the industry and we're full of innovation. And it's like, also you're shipping bombs around. Don't do that.
Okay. So something else that I think autonomous cars are going to do for us that's really beneficial is eliminate obnoxious things like speeding tickets and turn signal violations and stop sign violations and generally all these kind of little stupid things that right now most of the time don't create any real danger, but you can get in trouble for them and there are fines involved and they kind of create this potential encounter with the police and you'll get rid of all of those. And I don't exactly know how small police departments in towns and counties where they don't have a lot of other revenue sources and they're like, how are we going to fund our pension? Well, let's just go write tickets for nonsense. They're going to have to come up with a new way to deal with that, but I don't care. That's their problem. But people are no longer going to have to deal with that. I think that's a really good thing because your car will obviously not break the law.
I'm trying to think of any kind of loophole where you can be like, your car's not self-driving enough, or it's self-driving too much. I'm not coming up with anything, though.
Yeah. I mean, I would bet that the car would not even let you do things like drive with expired inspection. It would say, my inspection is bad. The only place I can go is the inspection station or the emergency room. I would hope it would allow you to do that.
That's a dark future. Well, what about refueling stations, even though the fuel's electricity? And what about back home? What if you need to get home? Or if it needs warranty repair? Or if you're driving to jail to turn yourself in? The whitelist gets huge.
We'll put you in charge of figuring that out.
What if you have to get to work to earn the money to be able to pay for the inspection?
I think we already have problems in law where people get trapped like that.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's already issues where people have to pay like child support payments and the payments are more than they make. So they get put in jail so they can't pay the payments.
Yeah, but those are like win-win-win systems where everyone wins. We're talking about something a little different here because the car's in charge. So I just don't think that the legal framework is going to keep up. I think they'll be like, it's up to you to get the inspection. And I think that the law will be perfectly fine with that.
Okay.
Probably indefinitely.
So you think maybe expired inspection will be the last thing that police can ticket you for in a car? And then like maybe seatbelt violations if we still say that's going to be a thing. I'm sure the legislators will hold on to that. They'll be like, we still need to make sure that you have a seatbelt on.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting question, isn't it? Because if your car's autonomous and it's pretty good and everyone has autonomous cars, you don't need a seatbelt as much.
Yeah.
It's not protecting you from very much anymore. I guess it's protecting you from single vehicle accidents. Like an autonomous car will still be able to encounter a bad road condition where a human would have had a problem too.
Or a tread wall separation or something.
Yeah. But like an inordinately large pothole or suddenly a sinkhole opens up in the road. Although, why am I talking about that with seatbelts? I don't know. I'm just imagining driving off of a mountain road or something like that.
Yeah. Maybe we'll encounter a whole new class of illegal things in your car that they'll ticket you for. I know that I've read legislators already complaining that people will have sex in their autonomous cars while they're driving.
Hopefully.
That's what I said too. I would love to be able to knock that out while I'm driving somewhere.
That seems like a really good use of an autonomous car.
If you had limousine glass and you had like a sink or a box of baby wipes or something, then it'd work out great.
What if you're surrounded on all four sides by other autonomous cars with camera crews? We'll just go the other way.
As long as you've auctioned the rights to the footage.
Yeah, I think that'll probably happen a lot. But it'll be to the point where it's not really an interesting topic of discussion for most people. They'll just be like, oh yeah, I have sex in my autonomous car sometimes. Which they'll just call a car. Be like, hey, do you ever pull out your smartphone while you're in the bathroom? And they're like, that's how I'm talking to you right now. Like, that happens a lot. Most people just sort of agree that that's what they do.
Yeah. So then I guess the other obnoxious thing that goes along with that will go away is insurance should get a lot cheaper because you take out the risk of a human driver and computers should be much better at driving.
So while I think the law won't necessarily keep up with inspections or it won't mandate that the car care about the inspections, I think that insurance companies will care a lot more about making the car attest that it's in no human mode while it's driving in order to receive this lower rate of coverage. I think we'll see a bunch of things like the human claims they intervened because they thought the conditions were unsafe. Then they crash the car. Then insurance wants to deny the claim because insurance claims that the human caused the crash. And I think we'll probably see crappy situations like that once in a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like all the people who ride motorcycles and they're like, yeah, I was about to get in an accident, so I had to lay her down. And like, if you had to lay down your motorcycle, you crashed it. Like, it's the only way that a motorcycle can stop is if the rubber is on the road. And so the second you've gone to the point where the rubber's not on the road, you've crashed. You haven't prevented a crash. That's like, yeah, I had to flip my car over in order to avoid an accident.
And catch it on fire.
That's actually a really close analogy. A car's about as good at braking while it's upside down. So I could see people doing that, like, to control for whatever reason. I don't know. What do you think insurance is going to do there?
They still need to insure for things like theft and weather damage and, other incidental kind of things, but
Well, not really. For my car, there's like collision, comp, and liability. And on my car, because it's a piece of junk, all I have is liability.
I know, but if you want comprehensive.
Oh, okay.
So you'll still have those other elements.
They'll be cheaper, right? That makes sense. Really, we should be seeing that already with like self-parking cars. Because I know a lot of people, they end up with comp claims because of parking related incidents.
I think that's such a small percentage of driving that it's hard to tease that data out, even with a large data set.
But it's got to be a large percentage of hitting your car into stuff.
Maybe so. I would expect pretty soon, though, that cars just won't have the ability for the human to intervene. And so you won't have to worry about situations where the insurance company tries to decline a claim saying that the human was at fault.
What's pretty soon?
Oh, well, we already talked about that.
Mm.
5 or 6 or 7 years. I don't know. 10 years, maybe.
You think in 2022 there will be a car where the human's not able to drive it? I don't think so.
You don't?
No.
You think there will be no car like that?
Not in 2022.
When do you think we'll have a human passenger who is unable to intervene?
I don't know. You could easily, say you're betting on it, you could easily be foiled by a law that says humans must be able to intervene. And then regardless of how good the technology gets, 50 years out, you'll still be able to put in a special key and get manual control and then drive it with your no driving practice ever because every car's been autonomous for years.
Yeah, and it also comes down to what the interface will be at that point. Will you just be able to scream stop and the car just assumes you have better information than it does and it stops?
What's the password?
It's going to be really problematic when you're having sex in your car and someone screams stop.
It's like, let me give you an example. How long do you think the space shuttle program would have had to run before it could put its wheels down automatically? Forever, kinda. It's more of a political decision.
Yeah.
Also, for people who don't know, the landing gear on the space shuttle could only be lowered manually by astronauts. And I believe that was because they claimed they were afraid of it happening automatically. But I guess they weren't afraid of, all the things with like the actual rocket motors happening automatically. So that remained the one manual part of the shuttle.
And thus necessitated humans on board, and specifically pilots on board, forever.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise known as job security.
You think astronauts are worried about job security?
I think so, but I think they acknowledge that there's not a lot they specifically can do about their own job security. Their job security is much more political.
Yeah. I think if you have this space shuttle and you think it's going to make a lot of trips to space, if you can ensure that humans are in it, that there's a lot of people at NASA who would benefit from that.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it wasn't job security for the astronauts, but for like the whole manned space flight program.
Oh, man. Do you remember laundering and fencing nickels?
Yeah.
So this is the kind of topic. Let me just give a very, very, very short explanation of this to the listeners. There was a crime, 10 years ago now, almost?
Yeah.
A truck of nickels going from the U.S. Mint to a Federal Reserve depository disappeared. And for a long time, they did not know what happened. They found the truck several states away from where it should have been. They could not find the driver. They didn't know if foul play was involved or not. They could not find the nickels. And for maybe 18 months or 2 years or 3 years, I forget, no idea what happened to the nickels. And it was quite a lot of nickels, and it came out to something like, I want to say it was $200,000 of nickels. I don't know. Eventually, they found the nickels, and they found almost all of them. Lo and behold, it's really hard to fence a tractor trailer full of nickels. I loved this story, and I remember when I originally heard, or saw a news headline that, trailer full of nickels stolen, and the first thing I thought is, yeah, what the hell are you going to do with that? You're never going to get rich off of those. You can't do anything. There's no way to turn them into money. You can't, drop them in a Coinstar machine often enough without eventually getting caught.
Hey,
You can't spend them, you know, effectively without so much hassle. Almost any way. And I remember back when I worked at NASA with Blake, he and I talked about this a couple times, and it was like, how the hell would you even get rid of these? And eventually most of the conversations would end up with, well, I guess it's better to just go get a real job because however much effort you spend trying to fence these nickels is going to net you less than just going to work. So it took them a couple years. They actually broke the case by accident. So I believe they were shipping the nickels to Florida, and then they found the truck in Alabama like a week after it was supposed to have arrived. And it was empty, and the driver was missing. And then they had absolutely no leads. And so a couple of years later, just out of the blue, some sheriff's deputies were serving a search warrant at a house in, I think, Louisiana. And it was on a drug issue. And so they were serving this search warrant, and they go in the backyard and they find like an igloo cooler full of brand new nickels. And one of the deputies remembered the story, and he was like, huh, it's weird that they have like a giant cooler full of nickels. And so they brought a metal detector out and they just searched the yard, and they found all the bags of nickels buried in the yard. And almost all of them were there. So whatever they tried for fencing apparently mostly failed. And then I remember being very disappointed that the news reports that came out at that time that they had arrested those guys and apparently found the nickels never had any information in them about the 18-wheeler driver. So I don't know what happened to him. He was originally from Mexico, and he had come to America, and he drove these 18-wheelers. And so it was not known in the original reports in 2005 whether he was part of it and he had just gone back to Mexico and that's why they couldn't find him, or if he had been killed or what. And none of the reports later on even cared. So they didn't try to figure that out or anything. And there was never any follow-up because then it was like, this story's dumb. So none of the journalists cared.
it actually sounds like they were a victim of sunk cost fallacy. They would have been better off throwing away the nickels.
Well, that's what they did. They buried them in the yard. They were essentially thrown away.
But they should have buried them at the dump.
Well, yeah, probably out in the ocean or something.
Even the dump would be fine. Like, you'd drive up with a truck full of, I don't know, whatever would look reasonable, like plastic trash bags that have very few of the nickels in each of them, so you can still throw them. You throw them all out of your truck. They don't have any identifying information. And then people just pile more garbage over them over time, and no one ever finds them.
Yeah.
But if you bury them in your own yard, like, there is a way that can fail. Especially if you still have a cooler full of nickels. Why do you have that?
Yeah. And then you sell the house eventually, and then a later owner finds them and calls the police, and they're like, let's just check the property records and see who lived here.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. There's the feedback that we received from a listener. He was saying, your thing about synchronizing watches in the previous episode was cute. During the war, and even when I was a kid, watches weren't all that accurate. Nobody knew what the exact time was unless he had recently called the special number that said, at the tone, the time will be 7:53 in 20 seconds. And if you set your watch by that, it would be off the next day. People's watches commonly varied by 5, 10, even 15 minutes. Like, what time you have? Oh, I've got 5 of. Oh, I've got 10 of. So, of course, if people were on a mission, then they all had to set their watches to the same time. I didn't know that. So, I'm a kid of the 80s, and apparently that was around the time when accurate quartz watch movements showed up. And so, starting around the 80s, pretty much everyone had access to, like, a $10 cheap Casio watch that told time that was accurate to, like, something like 5 seconds in a year or something like that. And I didn't realize that that had happened just after I was born. And so before that, everyone else had, I guess, mechanical watches, and they were accurate to a few seconds a day.
Mm-hmm.
So unless you were really diligent about keeping your watch accurate, then it just never was. And I did not realize that it mattered that much. And so it makes a lot of sense. Like, if you're in a World War II movie, then you're like, let's synchronize watches because they're off by a lot. I just didn't know. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Everyone I pulled at work was like, oh yeah, of course, yeah. I should have asked them in the opposite direction, where I was like, do you know why they had to do that? My mistake.
So what you really found out is all your coworkers are full of shit.
Yeah, we probably already knew that. I have found that almost everyone I've talked to at work about nuclear weapons does not really know how they work. I guess you just don't get exposed to it. Like, no one teaches you in school, like, oh, by the way, we're going to spend like 30 minutes with some diagrams and be like, here's how it works. Like, nobody knows. And I guess the main way people reason about nuclear weapons is they're just kind of like regular explosives, but there's like nuclear material in there. And then they don't really know much past that. Like, if a bomb blows up next to a nuclear bomb, then it'll go off.
Sympathetic detonation.
Yeah, like that sort of thing. And they're really unclear on the difference between a fission and a fusion device. And then they don't know what weapons were dropped on Japan or really that much about what their effects were. They don't really know what other countries have done besides the US. Nobody seems to be aware of how many tests the US has done, which is like 1,200 or something like that. They think there's like 5 or something. And it's like, no, they were just blowing up all of New Mexico continuously for decades.
Thanks for listening to this Fungineering podcast. Blake and I know that being an engineer is hard, and being a good engineer is even harder. There are easy ways out. You can get an MBA or a PMP or a systems engineering degree and slip off into management to start destroying things from the top down. If your highest career aspiration isn't vice president of engineering, but rather chief engineer, we want you in our audience. If you enjoyed our podcast, please sign up on our Patreon page to help us continue creating this content and send our podcast to the smartest people you know.